Japheth, the forgotten son of Noah, a name most readers gloss right over, and yet buried inside that name is a prophecy so powerful it may explain the rise of Western civilization and the final events of world history. Deep in the earliest pages of Genesis lies a promise, a blueprint, a divine whisper that reveals more than family lines. It reveals destiny. You've heard of Shem, the line that led to Abraham, to David, to Jesus. You've heard of Ham, the branch connected to Egypt and Canaan. But Japheth, the son mentioned without a story, the one whose name reads like a footnote, why would God include him if there was nothing more to see? Here is the bold truth. Japheth's story didn't disappear, it expanded. His legacy didn't vanish, it stretched across continents, and his blessing wasn't small, it was global. Sometimes the ones history forgets are the very ones God used to shape it. In this video, we're going to uncover how this overlooked son of Noah laid the foundation for empires, carried a prophetic promise hidden in plain sight, and became a key to understanding the spread of the gospel to the Gentile world. We'll explore the mysterious blessing Noah spoke over him, the nations that sprang from his bloodline, and why his name resurfaces in the end-time visions of Ezekiel and Revelation. Have you ever wondered why the Bible mentions Japheth so briefly, yet his name echoes in the final prophecies of Scripture? Keep watching, because one overlooked verse in Genesis may hold the answer to how your own spiritual identity fits into the grand design of God's covenant plan. At first glance, the genealogy in Genesis seems straightforward. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But read Genesis 10:21 carefully, and something strange surfaces. Unto Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth the elder. Wait, Japheth the elder? Could it be that Japheth was actually Noah's firstborn? Some translations render this differently, and in the original Hebrew, the phrasing is genuinely ambiguous. The Septuagint, the ancient Greek version of the Old Testament, leans toward Japheth being the eldest, and yet the spiritual blessing passed over him. Shem received the messianic promise. Japheth quietly faded into the margins. This was not a mistake. It was a divine pattern. Scripture shows us this again and again. God chose Isaac over Ishmael, Jacob over Esau, Joseph, the youngest shepherd boy, over all his older brothers, David, the forgotten shepherd boy, over his mightier siblings. God has never followed human hierarchy. He chooses not by birth order, but by the weight of calling. Japheth's place in the family line wasn't an oversight. It was a setup. His story speaks to anyone who has ever felt passed over, a reminder that your worth in God's kingdom is not based on position, but on purpose. And that quiet detail about his birth order, it becomes the thread that ties him to one of the most dramatic prophecies in the entire Bible, a confrontation still to come. There is something hauntingly beautiful about the silence surrounding Japheth. In a Bible filled with detailed stories, passionate prophets, and dramatic events, his name appears and then quietly disappears. No great journey, no heroic battle, just a few lines in a genealogy. But silence in Scripture never means insignificance, because while Japheth did not receive the messianic promise, that honor went to Shem. He did receive a prophetic blessing that would ripple through history. Genesis 9:27. Noah opens his mouth and utters these words over his son. God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. At first, it sounds poetic, even vague, but tucked inside is one of the most powerful prophecies in Scripture. God shall enlarge Japheth, a promise of expansion, of territory, of destiny. He shall dwell in the tents of Shem, not just political closeness, but spiritual intimacy. a prophetic glimpse of two worlds intertwining. This wasn't a blessing of simple prosperity. It was a divine hint. Japheth's descendants would one day come under the spiritual covering of Shem's line, a foreshadowing of Gentile nations entering the covenant. If you have ever felt invisible in God's plan, consider Japheth. No spotlight, no exploits, no fame. And yet a single sentence spoken over him shaped civilizations. There is a sacred weight in being hidden, because sometimes the vessels God uses most are the ones he keeps quiet until the right moment, and that moment was coming. Japheth's silence would end in the place we least expect, in the visions of a prophet, in a war at the end of the age. After Noah's blessing, the story moves quickly. The floodwaters recede, the ark settles, and humanity begins again. Then comes a list, a long list. Genesis 10 verses 2 through 5. For many readers, it's the kind of passage we skim over, names we can't pronounce, places we've never heard of. But behind those names are the birth certificates of nations and the blueprint of prophecy. Japheth's sons Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Teras. These names are more than genealogy. They are geography. They are destiny. Gomer, linked to regions north of Israel, likely ancient Europe. Magog, a name that will echo again in Ezekiel and Revelation. Madai, ancient Persia, the root of the Medo-Persian Empire. Javan, Greece, the birthplace of Western thought. Tubal and Meshech, territories near the Black Sea, modern-day Turkey and the Caucasus. Teras, a possible ancestor of the Thracians of southeastern Europe. These names moved, expanded, collided, and multiplied. They became languages, cultures, kingdoms, and empires. Japheth's line gave rise to the Greeks, the Persians, the Romans, civilizations that would shape the intellectual and political framework of the known world. And tucked within this lineage is something stunning, a direct prophetic tie to Daniel's visions. In Daniel chapter 8, the prophet sees a ram and a goat, symbols of Medo-Persia and Greece, nations descended from Japheth. These weren't random symbols. They were spiritual threads leading straight back to Noah's forgotten son. Japheth was not the father of a tribe. He was the root system of entire civilizations. And those civilizations would become vessels of philosophy, of infrastructure, and ultimately of something sacred, the gospel itself. The stage had to be set, not just for the coming of the Messiah, but for the spread of his message. And Japheth's line became the scaffolding upon which the story of salvation would be proclaimed to the world. For generations, Shem was known as the chosen line, the one through whom the Messiah would come. And from Shem did come Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and ultimately Jesus. But Japheth's role remained hidden, quiet, almost forgotten, until the New Testament turns the page. After the resurrection of Christ, the gospel begins to travel, and it doesn't stop with Israel. It moves to the Greeks, the Romans, the Scythians, and beyond. The message refuses to stay inside the tent of Shem. It begins to welcome others in. This was not an accident. It was fulfillment. Romans chapter 11, verses 17 through 19 explains it powerfully. Gentiles are grafted into the root, not replacing Israel, but joining the tree, becoming partakers of promises spoken long before. Jesus, a descendant of Shem, became the bridge, extending the covenant to the nations of Japheth. What Noah breathed as a blessing over his son, "He shall dwell in the tents of Shem," was not in vain. Poetry. It was prophecy. And it came true in the spread of the early church, in Antioch, Athens, Rome, Corinth, and Ephesus, cities built by the children of Japheth, now filled with the gospel of Shem's greatest son. The forgotten son was not forgotten. He was promised. In Joshua 10:13, a curious line appears. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? It is one of only 2 direct biblical references to this ancient text, a book outside the canon that nonetheless held historical weight in the days of Israel's early leaders. And though the book of Jasher is not scripture, some traditions preserve fragments that speak about Japheth. In those pages, he is not merely a name in a list. He is portrayed as a man of peace, wisdom, and foresight, a builder, a thinker, a father of nations who chose stability over conquest. Whether these portrayals are literal history or preserved oral tradition, they offer something consistent, the same pattern we have seen all along. Japheth may be absent from the spotlight, but his influence never truly disappears. And isn't that just like God? To allow truth to ring not only in the words of prophets, but in the memory of a people, preserved even in books that sit just outside the sacred scrolls. But the next time Japheth's name appears, it will not be quiet at all. It will come in the thunder of prophecy, in a war still to come. For centuries, Japheth's name lay quietly in the soil of Genesis. Then, in the swirling visions of the prophet Ezekiel, it re-emerges. Ezekiel 38 verse 2. Son of man, set your face against Gog, of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Those names, Magog, Meshech, Tubal, are not new. We have seen them before. They come from Genesis 10. They are the descendants of Japheth. Somehow, the line that once scattered quietly into the nations arises again at the end of days. Interpretations vary. Some scholars connect Magog with modern Russia, others with regions around the Black Sea, Turkey, or the Caucasus. What matters is not the map, it is the pattern. The descendants of Japheth, who once laid the foundations of civilization, return in a final confrontation centered on Israel, the land of Shem. Ezekiel paints a chilling picture, a coalition of nations, a vast army moving against the people of God. And this time, Japheth's role is not that of the peaceful builder or silent father. It is a force in motion, a prophecy unfolding. Why? Why does the line of Japheth, blessed with enlargement, honored with dwelling in the tents of Shem, now stand at the gates of conflict?
The answer may lie in the same principle we have seen throughout. God's promises carry weight, but so do choices. Japheth's descendants were given territory, influence, and access to truth. But in the final days, some may turn that inheritance into rebellion, aligning not with the covenant, but against it. A name nearly lost in Genesis returns in the last days as a force in the final war. We are left with a sobering truth. Prophetic legacy does not guarantee righteousness. It only guarantees responsibility. So when we hear these ancient names again, Magog, Meshech, Tubal, we are not merely hearing history, we are hearing prophecy not. In an age obsessed with DNA tests and ancestry maps, millions are asking a simple question: where do I come from? Surprisingly, that question leads many back to something the Bible declared long before science existed. Geneticists studying Y-DNA haplogroups, particularly R1A and R1B, have traced massive population migrations from regions near the Caucasus and Central Asia into Europe. These patterns align closely with the historical territories of Japheth's descendants: Gomer, Magog, Madai, Tubal, Meshech, Javan. Some scholars suggest these haplogroups may reflect the dispersion of Japheth's lineage, branching into Europe, Russia, Persia, and parts of India. It is not exact science, and we must tread carefully. The goal is not to prove the Bible with chromosomes, but time and again the echoes line up. The migration routes, the cultural seeds, the languages and traditions, all whispering of a common root, a patriarch whose name few remember, but whose impact shaped the very borders of the earth. Acts 17:26 affirms it clearly. He made from one blood every nation of men, and determined their appointed times and the boundaries of their habitation. What Moses wrote in faith, science is now tracing with data, not because the Bible needs validation, but because the fingerprints of God remain even in our DNA. Japheth did not build an ark. He did not wrestle with angels, lead a nation through the desert, or call down fire from heaven. His name appears and then disappears. But in Scripture, silence is never without purpose. Maybe Japheth wasn't forgotten. Maybe he was hidden, because some of God's most powerful instruments are not loud. They don't stand on stages. They don't write songs or part seas. They build. They raise families. They shape culture in quiet obedience, generation after generation. Japheth represents every believer who works in the shadow of history, not to be seen, but to
be faithful. He is the missionary whose name history forgets, but whose work changes a village forever. The teacher, the parent, the builder, the translator, the one who lays foundations for someone else's harvest. In that sense, Japheth is not just a patriarch of nations, he is a mirror for all who serve unseen. God enlarged Japheth, not for fame, but for fruit. His silence was strategic. His expansion was intentional. His legacy wasn't in a spotlight, it was in every city built, every language spread, every road paved for the gospel to pass through. And centuries later, that legacy lives in you. He was the son no one expected much from, overshadowed by Shem, unmarked by miracles, uncelebrated in story. And yet Japheth became the father of nations, the carrier of a blessing that would stretch from Genesis to Revelation, from the tents of Shem to the church of Christ. His silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. His legacy wasn't erased, it was woven into ours. Because every believer today, every Gentile grafted into the family of God, is living proof that Noah's words in Genesis 9:27 were not poetry, they were prophecy. God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem. That is your story. You are not forgotten. You are not outside the covenant. You were seen from the beginning, written into the plan through a son history almost forgot. So now the question becomes, have you ever seen yourself in Japheth's story? If this message stirred something in you, if it opened your eyes to the hidden power of biblical prophecy, stay connected. Subscribe to the channel for more revelations from Scripture. Leave a comment and share what Japheth's legacy means to you. And share this video with someone who needs to know they have a place in God's story. The forgotten son of Noah was never forgotten by God, and neither are you.